Caller referenced the decision yesterday it was late yesterday morning by, I guess, media standards. It was very early yesterday morning by California standards. The Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals, which is dominated by San Francisco Marxist Leninists. And of course, they have a huge impact because we're thrown into that district as well, even though Idaho culturally is vastly different. Now, it's not going to have any impact whatsoever on the law in Idaho when it comes to concealed carry. Doesn't overturn anybody's laws. It just says in California that California can go ahead and write a law that said you do not have a right to conceal carry. In other words, you need a note from your mommy. And many states have these restrictions. Say, well, if you want to conceal carry, you have to have good cause. And they'll say, do you have an order of protection, or do you carry money for your employer, or no, I just live in Oakland or San Francisco, and I figured that someone's going to try to rob me. No, not good enough. 7 minutes after 9 o'clock. Bill Colley with you on Top Story on News Radio 1310, KLIX, and newsradio1310.com. And NBC Bulletin this just after it happened yesterday morning. Pete Williams from NBC, by a vote of 7-4, the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals in San Francisco upheld a California law that requires gun owners to show a good reason before they can get a license to carry a concealed handgun. The protection of the Second Amendment, whatever the scope of that protection may be, simply does not extend to the carrying of concealed firearms in public by members of the general public. Of course, it doesn't say anything like that in the Second Amendment whatsoever. I have confidence, at least. There's so much we see today that tells us that we are headed down the wrong road and that the Alinskyeites are taking over the planet, at least taking over the United States and trying to destroy our liberties. But the Supreme Court in Washington, even with those four liberals and that so-called swing vote in Justice Kennedy, who's not sure what he is, we have seen them generally get behind with the Heller case and some of the other cases that have come out of Washington, D.C. and Detroit and various communities. They've made it very clear that that Second Amendment does not have a lot of other lines in it. You can, look at it and it means what it says. So I don't know if someone will challenge this now, and even if we end up with another liberal on that court, I don't think it's going to. I don't think this is going to stand. I really don't. 9 minutes after 9 o'clock. Bill Colley with you on Top Story on News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com. It's 71 right now, and you're up next. You're on the air.
Good morning, Bill. Bill, I've got a thought maybe you can improve upon. I just realized that a wall on the Mexican border would probably be more beneficial for the good Mexican citizens down there that own businesses, plantations, and so forth. The drug money going back across the border can buy out mayors and police chiefs, and once they get in there, they're there forever. And also, a wall might stop some of the guns from going, the drug money guns that they purchase from going back across the border. Mexicans would be a lot safer if there was a wall on the border.
Well, and consider, too, as well, that a lot of that drug money going back there is coming from American liberals. Thank you for the call. How many conservatives do you know that would actually use a lot of dope? The numbers would be quite low. It's not in the nature of a conservative to be smoking reefer or snorting cocaine or shooting up heroin and doing all of those things. And the meth business, which 20 years ago was controlled by, just dinglings along the back roads of America, now controlled by the narco-terrorists from Mexico. But it's the people using these drugs who are generally liberals. Your Hollywood-type crowd is using all the expensive stuff. They're the ones sending the money back to Mexico. For all of they're yammering about how, we have to eliminate guns because the Mexican terrorists might get them. They're helping buy all of these things because they're sending their money down there. But it would never occur to them because they think they have every right in the world to abuse all of these terrible narcotics. And for that reason, American liberals are really you have people in Mexico who are trying to flee simply because they're trying to get away from the violence. And that violence is perpetuated by the wallets of American lefties. 11 minutes after 9 o'clock. Bill Colley with you on Top Story on News Radio 1310 KLIX, newsradio1310.com. As Charles Krauthammer has said in the past, if walls don't work, then why is there one around the White House? And the Israelis have walls. The Hungarians built a wall to keep out the migrants. Yes, they do work. People say, well, we can't build one possibly that long. Well, here's a thought. Does it necessarily have to be bricks and mortar? I mean, it could be, but we have an ability today in our modern era with electronic sensors and everything else we use. And I've also recommended in the past that if we did what every other country did and just put in a couple of machine gun nests, by gosh, after you fired a few rounds off, you'd probably cut down on that attempt by people to come across that border. I mean, you'd greatly cut it down. But if the Chinese, with very little technology, thousands of years ago, could build a big long wall across part of their country, seems to me, and Democrats tell us all the time, oh, shovel-ready projects. Oh, we'll take some of your money, we'll give it to somebody else, and it'll make the country better and turn the economy around. Well, if you want a big construction project, you wonder if they were building this wall, too. Maybe we could convince Mexico to pay for it by saying, well, you know what? All of that illegal labor in this country can build it. Aha! There you go. And then they can send all the remittances home. Of course, there won't be any more money coming after that, but that'll be the end of it. Here's a story I happened to see this morning. Caught this on the Drudge Report from the Arizona Daily Sun. Border ranchers with few options now have police radios. There's a photograph here of a rancher. Well, he looks the part. He's got like a mustache that looks like it's straight out of, what is it, that guy, Sam Elliott style mustache. He's got a big hat on, but he's standing alongside a fence, and he's got a two-way radio in his hands. And it says, cattle rancher John Ladd holds his new radio issued by the Cochise County Sheriff's Department for use in cases of emergency near Naco, Arizona. About 10 miles of it sits on the international border. He says drug smugglers frequently cross through his land and have burglarized his home on several occasions. The radios were handed out to about 30 border ranchers so they could have faster communications with 911 dispatchers. And guess what? Government did not pay for this. So far, 31 ranchers along the border have taken the new handheld radios from the Sheriff's Department. Sheriff Mark Daniels obtained them through private funding in an effort to improve safety in the rural areas that often lack strong cell phone coverage. And this was decided upon after the murder 6 years ago of rancher Rob Krentz, and it has led to increased security and communication in the neighborhood. So there are people who are taking matters into their own hands. But again, if you put down just a few of these 50 caliber machine guns in nests along the border, and as these guys decided to try to come across the border, just mow them down after the river was turned red for a few days, I don't think you'd see a lot of people attempting to cross it. It's called deterrence, my friends. And gosh, Bill, that's so mean and nasty, and you're talking about shooting people. Look, liberal newspaper editors in Detroit, Michigan are talking about putting Republicans in sacks and drowning them in rivers. All right? Because Republicans won't be liberals. For that very reason alone, they're recommending that Republicans be killed. That comes from the Detroit Free Press. If you were listening in the last hour, you heard me talking about that story. I'm telling you right now, we would be doing what most countries, no, in fact, all countries do, but other than the United States, all over the world, when it comes to protecting their own borders. That's all that's being done everywhere. And yet, lefty out there, oh, we can't do that. Why can't we do that? Well, that would be mean. Why other people are doing it? Well, it doesn't mean we have to do it. Well, other people are promoting the sanctity of their own borders and their own nationalities. Well, that would be mean. Why would it be mean? Well, then we couldn't have more Democrats come here and vote for a free lunch, and the Republicans might start winning elections, so that would be really mean. Then we'd have to drown even more of you. 9:16, Bill Colley with you on Top Story on News Radio 1310, KLIX and NewsRadio1310.com. Look, Lefty, we know exactly what you're up to. And it's really the destruction of this country, which you have so long despised and hated. And before Lefty started getting his hands on the apparatus, when I was a kid growing up, this was the best country in the world. We had the strongest economy in the world. We had a huge manufacturing base. You could get 2 jobs if you felt you needed a little extra money. Now you have a hard time finding even one. I heard this morning on television, the president goes around, oh, the unemployment rate has gotten so much better and it's all my fault. That's a good way to put it. Except that they now count, if you work 1 hour a week, you're counted as employed. So you understand how they've tried to, and yet media won't tell you that in the mainstream media because, well, it might encourage you to vote for somebody other than their fellow traveling liberals. But I recall a time in this country when this country flexed its muscles, people around the world listened. And we knew our children had futures ahead of them, good futures, better lives. And Lefty has destroyed all of that. Lefty complains, oh, we use too much of the world's natural resources. Lefties complaining now. There was a story in the Washington Examiner a couple of days ago. It says that American leftists are joining their European counterparts saying that the United States should not be putting air conditioning in our offices and our homes. Well, then no one would be able to live in Las Vegas or Phoenix or Miami and all of those high rises because the temperature rises, right? So when if you're on floor number 90, you do need that, right? Well, no, you Americans are just wasting the world's resources. There is no need for air conditioning in Europe, except during the heat wave in Europe in 2003, 70,000 people died. Mainly, young children who needed a cool environment or old people who needed a cool environment, but that saved the Europeans tens of millions of dollars, of course, of paying out benefits to care for the young children and the old people. And if you don't care about killing little babies in the womb, well, who cares about roasting them in their bedrooms and roasting a few old folks in an old folks' home? If it saves you money in the long run, well, gee golly gosh, we as liberals will go along with that because, it's just a human life. And in California, if you want to kill yourself, you got to pay the government $2,000 and they'll allow it. Once again, to decrease the surplus population. You know what they call countries where they don't have air conditioning? Third world. You know what they call countries that don't use a quarter of the world's energy? Third world. Do we want to be third world? Well, the lefties in this country say yes. And if they keep opening the borders and allowing more people to pour in here because they think it should be a borderless world, everyone will be living in third world squat conditions. And no one will ever come out of it. Do you know why? Because no one will ever have the money anymore to be able to make the money and save the money and then invest the money that will come up with the new technologies to lift people out of poverty. Because everyone will be taxed to death so they can take care of all of the dead weight that keeps showing up on our borders. 9:18. Bill Colley with you on Top Story on News Radio 1310, KLIX, and newsradio1310.com. There are people, good Americans, who are willing to go try and help people lift themselves up by their bootstraps. That includes our friend Dr. Jonathan Tripp. He and his family are going on a mission trip to Nicaragua. They're leaving in just a few weeks, and they are looking for toiletries because in that part of the world where they're going in the jungle, people have no access to a lot of these things. So they're asking that if you can help out, drop by his office, which is on Fillmore Street, on the north end of the city, directly across from the main post office. Drop by and donate some toiletries. Additionally, his sons are going along on the trip. They're paying their own way, and of course, in order to earn the money to do it, they have to mow a lot of grass. They also have to clean out a lot of pools and help people clean out a lot of garages. So if you're dropping off some toiletries, you may also request their help around your home, and then in turn they will be able to help out people the old-fashioned way through just putting a lot of elbow grease into it. We'd like to remind you, too, as well, that Dr. Tripp's office is still accepting new patients. And the great thing about Tripp Family Medicine is they can often see you on the very same day if you have an illness. Sometimes in just a matter of hours, they'll tell you, sure, come on in. Better Health with Tripp Family Medicine. We do it every Wednesday right here on News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com. And remember, life's too short not to feel good. More with Bill Colley on the way in just a few minutes on News Radio 1310 KLIX. There was a fellow writing today in Daily Signal saying that we better step back away from this transgender bathroom issue. Details ahead. I was just reading one of the obituaries on Gordie Howe from a website called The Hockey Writers. And before Dale Earnhardt became the intimidator in NASCAR, that really was could have been the nickname for Gordie Howe as a hockey player, who said, you play a little rough, you give yourself a little more room. Gordie Howe growing up in Saskatoon, in Saskatchewan, that's a much more conservative part of Canada, where, there's a lot of hardworking blue-collar people, and so it's a lot like here. And so that work ethic, you got to be tough, and not like a doughy, soft liberal. 24 minutes after 9 o'clock, Bill Colley with you on Top Story on News Radio 1310, KLIX and newsradio1310.com. 70, thank you for joining us today. Do want to remind you, speaking of, we were talking about heat and hot places a little earlier, mentioning air conditioning. Well, you certainly discovered in the last few days whether your unit was working or not. And with the summer heat here, you need repairs sometimes, and right away you need to do those, or you would like to try to get something serviced just to keep it running well through the summer. That is all the more reason to call the pros at Ramsey Heating and Electric. Make sure the job is done right the first time, and set yourself up for a great summer. You can see Ramsey Heating and Electric at 2600 Overland Avenue in Burley, or give them a telephone call. That number, 678-0459. That's Ramsey Heating and Electric, where they sell warm winters and cool summers. Ramsey Heating and Electric. Bill Colley with you for another, call it 35 minutes this morning, and then start sounding the alarm as my weekend begins. As I said, hoping for a big weekend, so stay off the roads and give me a lot of elbow room, just like Gordie Howe would have wanted. I saw this today at a publication called Daily Signal, which I always recommend on this program, and we were talking just briefly about this a bit earlier. Walt Heyer, who is a fellow who thought that he was a woman, has been writing in the last several weeks from a conservative perspective about this whole transgender LGBT thing and how dangerous it can actually be. And he's been writing from his own perspective and telling us that he made some huge mistakes. I wish I had been told about these risks before I had gender surgery. A 2016 study, he writes, comparing 20 Lebanese transgender participants to 20 control subjects, reported that transgender individuals suffer from more psychiatric pathologies compared to the general population. More than 50% had active suicidal thoughts and 45% had a major depressive episode. Now, liberals will say, well, that's because they want to be somebody else. But you might also argue maybe the fact that they're unstable is what leads them to believe there's something else. The experience of many gender-confused individuals, he writes, is that medical pros are quick to reach a diagnosis of gender dysphoria and then recommend immediate cross-gender hormone therapy and irreversible assignment surgery without investigating and treating the coexisting issues. Now, what he's saying is doctors are doing this knee-jerk response because they're under pressure by the liberal establishment. Oh, if you don't do that and you tell them they're nuts, that would be mean-spirited. So, therefore, you've got to go in and cut off their, Research studies from 2013 and 2009, he writes, looking for a transgender gene, showed not a smidgen of abnormality in the genetic makeup that causes someone to be transgender. The study concluded that improved access to medical and psychological care are urgently needed to address mental health and substance dependence disorders in this population. On the contrary, it did not conclude that improved access to bathrooms, hormones, or surgery are urgently needed. So in other words, just like there was no homosexual gene, there is no gene for transgenderism. And his point being that perhaps these people just need someone to counsel them instead of going in with a knife and cutting them all up. And he said, in my life and in the lives of those whose families contact me, traumatic childhood experiences are present 100% of the time. So it may be something that happened to this child when that child happened to be young. It could well be perhaps somebody did something to them that we would think, well, maybe someone went into the bathroom and did something to them. Now they claim they have to go into the bathroom, right? I'm telling you, we are allowing the lunatics to run the asylum in this country, and if we continue to go down this path, we won't have a country very much longer. And to sit here and say, well, you're being mean-spirited and you're being a bigot and you're being a bully, I'm sorry if that's what's needed to save us, then we better get a little tough out there. 29 minutes now after 9 o'clock. Bill Colley with you. President Obama yesterday had these people at the White House. I'll share his comments in a few minutes. Well, he didn't have all of them, but there aren't that many. He could have had all of them there, I suppose. But he had them come visit the White House. You're wondering if my daughters are going to the bathroom down the hall right now. Please, Joe, go down there and join them. I bet that didn't happen now, did it? Can you imagine that if the Obama girls were peeing in the toilet and all of a sudden some big burly guy said he was going to go join them? The Secret Service would have body slammed him. I guess the Secret Service then would be accused of being bigoted, mean-spirited, and hateful. 9:30. Bill Colley with you on Top Story on News Radio 1310, KLIX, and newsradio1310.com. Why is it so many people, and we're not even talking LGBT issues, so many people no longer know who they are? I mean, my gosh. When my folks were growing up during the Great Depression, they had just a few thoughts. A warm place to sleep, occasionally a hot meal, and just some hope. And that's all they had left, hope that it would get better. Oh, and then people had to go off and fight a war before it did. And yet, today, everyone who's got more than they ever had is like, well, I just don't feel fulfilled. Perhaps my name is really Bruce Lynn Jenner. More coming up. Bill Colley with you this morning. Please, keep the faith, whatever you have to do.